Hi, this is Alan Hunt. He asked me if I wanted to comment on the movie UHF, and I do, because it's a great movie. I wrote a bunch of stuff down, but, it kind of seems a little pretentious to write down my thoughts and why I think that this movie is the greatest movie of all time, when in fact it's just a dumbass movie, which is why it is the greatest movie of all time. Weird Al, his comedy is stupid, and that's what I like. So there you go. That's about it. However, I did write this part down. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to read it. It's like Tom Hanks in the movie Philadelphia, or Angela Bassett in What Love's Got to Do with It. Al Yankovic has made an important film that champions a cause. Only instead of discrimination or domestic violence, his cause is stupidity. It's hard to really put a name on it. I just know that this movie means something. This is important. All right. It appears my work here is finished, so I must now be returning to my home planet. Bye-bye.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we ask, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, the King Bee.
Call me Mr. Butterfingers.
And today we're going to take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. Each week, the audience selects from 6 movie choices, and we break out our race car VHS tape rewinder and watch the movie that tallied the highest number of votes. At the end of the podcast, the King Bee and I will provide the audience with the number of wipes the movie took to get off our respective bums. So find a comfortable spot on the sofa and accompany us for a journey through our vast VHS movie collection. You can download Shat the Movies via iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Pandora, TuneIn, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are found. And today's podcast is a little bit special because the King Bee and I are rolling as a duo as Raj is in Florida working and watching U.S. soccer, and Big D is in Brazil. So you get the two of us, we happy few, we band of brothers, the native Arizona crew. This week we are continuing our long string of commissions, breaking away from the voting. So if you are going to vote, thanks so much for doing so. But a few special listeners have decided to jump in line, throw us a couple bucks to do a movie that they would like to hear on the podcast. And this week's commission comes from listener Erika in Guilford, Connecticut. And Erika writes, "Hey guys, I love your podcast. I'm a faithful listener of Shat the Movies and Shat on TV, and I'd like to commission you to review UHF, the 1989 Weird Al Yankovic movie. Growing up, I loved Weird Al. I'm 45 years old now, so I grew up in Weird Al's heyday. I've listened to his music so often that the original versions of the songs he parodies sound odd to me. In the summer of 1989, I was 15 years old. My cousin Rich, sister Lisa, and I went to see UHF as a sneak preview matinee double feature with See No Evil, Hear No Evil, starring Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. With a newly printed driver's license, my cousin drove us to the theater in Old Saybrook, Connecticut for a Freedom Fun Fest. It was weird. It was summer and the place should have been bustling with tweeners and the like, but it was a ghost town and we were the only ones in the theater under the age of 70. We absolutely loved this movie. Tears streaming down our faces, laughing kind of love. At the end, we gave it a standing ovation, much to the dismay of our fellow viewers who thought we were rowdy teens and had absolutely no idea what was going on with this crap movie. We stayed for See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and riding the high of just having seen possibly the greatest movie ever made, I have zero recollection of what it was about. UHF wasn't released on DVD until the early 2000s, so I went the better portion of a decade not having seen it again. Once released, I proudly bought myself a copy and continued to watch it about once a year. My family quotes this movie often, and the soundtrack produced my favorite Weird Al song of all time, the epic Biggest Ball of Twine in Minnesota. Last year, I saw Weird Al in concert with the aforementioned Cousin Rich. It was a tour of only his original songs. Still fans, we couldn't wait to go, as his original songs are even better than the parodies. But listening to these songs one after another slapped me in the face with one stark revelation. Weird Al is a sociopath. His penchant for cruelty, animal or human, stalking, mass shooting glorification, etc., is hard to stomach now. I know this is only a persona, but honestly, it's not funny anymore in today's climate. So I went home and watched UHF as a litmus test for this revelation, because how could UHF let me down? Yep, it's kind of disturbing. Don't get me wrong, I still laugh at the same things. I think Michael Richards as Kramer has nothing on Michael Richards as Stanley Spadowski, and it makes me wax nostalgic for my youth and the huge role Weird Al played in it. But, I'd love to know your thoughts and hear your reactions. Thanks so much for this labor of love. It shines through, and I, plus many others, truly appreciate it. And that's from Erika in Guilford, Connecticut. And Erika, I appreciate you commissioning this movie, because it's one of my favorites, and I don't think there's any way we would have done it without you.
What a great letter. I feel like she just did half the work for us. Thanks for setting up the framework. I guess let's hash the rest of it out.
Yeah, so the overall plot, as Erika mentioned, it's a 1989 American comedy starring Weird Al Yankovic, Fran Drescher, Victoria Jackson, Kevin McCarthy, Michael Richards, Gede Watanabe, Billy Barty, Anthony Geary, Emo Philips, and Trinidad Silva. It is dedicated to Silva, who died shortly after principal filming. The film was directed by Jay Levy, Yankovic's manager, who also co-wrote the screenplay with him. In it, Yankovic stars as George Newman, a shiftless dreamer who stumbles into managing a low-budget TV station and surprisingly finds success with his eclectic programming choices. The title refers to ultra-high-frequency analog television broadcasting band on which such low-budget TV stations often were placed in the U.S. Yankovic and Levy struggled with finding a film production company for financing the film, but were eventually able to get Orion Pictures' support after stating they could keep the film costs under $5 million. Principal filming took place around Tulsa, with many of the extras for the film from the Tulsa and Dallas, Texas areas. UHF earned mixed critical reviews and was further impacted by being released in the middle of one of Hollywood's largest blockbuster summer periods. While only a modest success during its theatrical release, it became a cult film on home video. So King B, we always ask the Shat team as we do the podcast, where were you? What do you remember about UHF from your childhood?
You know, I vaguely remember seeing this on TV. My Weird Al experience, I remember playing his cassettes on a little boombox while me and the neighbors played horse on the basketball hoop in the garage. But I couldn't place how and when I'd watch this movie. When I did some research, I kind of figured out why. The month leading up to this movie, you saw releases of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Ghostbusters 2, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You got Batman. You got Weekend at Bernie's. Even Lethal Weapon 2. There's no reason I would have seen this in a theater with that much other material coming out. I love that as you rattle through the casting, I thought to myself, it's a real veritable who's who of who?
No, I mean, I think there's some big names on there. For me, this movie was... So for me, discovering this movie came along with some of my best friends that I made in elementary school. So my friends Alan Hunt and Ryan Swank kind of were already into Weird Al and indoctrinated me in the fall of 1992. So if you guys don't remember, people who don't remember MTV, Weird Al started doing this thing in the 80s called Al TV, where every few years he would take over the cable music video channel MTV for several hours, and it would only be like one episode, and it would be a several hours long. So 1992 was the 6th episode, and it usually coincided with like an album release that Weird Al would do. So when this was on MTV, we taped it on the VCR and we watched this over and over and over again. He was doing stuff like doing voiceovers on Aerosmith's Love in an Elevator music video and just other weird shit like that. And he was essentially making fun of MTV while on MTV. This is back when MTV used to do cool shit.
Did he also do kind of a parody on the Max Headroom thing as well?
Yeah, he did that. That was one of the bits that he did. And he also like would kind of goof on MTV hosts themselves. It was some of the funniest shit I've ever seen.
So Erika, as you're writing to us and talking about how, you know, he's possibly a sociopath and all the things that you mentioned, I just thought, well, yeah, he's fixated. He's a cartoon. He's a cartoon in living form. And I just got to wonder if Is he really a sociopath, or is he just kind of a reflection of the society that raised all of us?
I mean, I'm inclined to agree with Erika only because of the lyrics to his songs. Like when he does like Melanie, that was a weird one where he's like talking about, stalking this woman and he was watching her take showers and stuff like that. Or other songs where he's talking about like, pulling the wings off of flies. Like those were the good old days where he like bashed in a guy's head. It's very like unexpectedly violent for a comedy album.
Well, the guy cut his teeth on that Dr. Demento radio show, and it just kind of makes sense. It's the natural progression in my mind. I don't think that there's any genuine sentiment there. I think it's just nonsensical, non sequitur, cartoonish violence, because that's just that's how this guy was milk fed. It's in his DNA.
Right. Well, we'll explore that as we get through the podcast. So anyway, Al TV got me finally into discovering UHF, the movie, which I also watched on repeat during like sleepovers, pool parties, road trips, holiday get-togethers. It was the all-purpose rewatch movie. And I think other than Pulp Fiction, this is the movie I've seen the most times. I was able to quote it still today. I mean, I watched it last night and I was like, yeah, I remember every part of this movie. With that being said, let's roll the trailer.
Listen, let's get one thing straight. Guns don't kill people. I do.
Channel 62 has the lowest ratings in the history of television. What they need is a new station manager.
No, not him. Forget it. No way.
A man of action. A man of courage. A man of vision.
What's your name?
Billy.
Billy what?
What they get is a man so desperate, he'll put anyone on the air.
Hey, Stanley.
Yeah, George?
How would you like your own TV show?
Okay. You get the drink from the fire hose! Okay, you ready? Yeah! Open wide!
He's Conan, the librarian.
Today we're teaching poodles how to fly.
We beat out the networks.
George Newman. He starts where the others stop.
We're the #1 station in town.
Orion Pictures presents Weird Al Yankovic in UHF, the movie.
George Newman is a daydreamer with a hyperactive imagination, making it difficult for him and his friend Bob to keep a steady job. George's uncle Harvey wins the deed to Channel 62, a UHF television station, in a poker game, and Harvey's wife Esther urges him to put George in charge, hoping it'll help turn his life around. George and Bob find that the station is nearly bankrupt and struggles for ratings with its lineup of reruns. In the opening scene, George is fantasizing about being like Indiana Jones. And, when we watched LA Story, Big D talked about how some of the sight gags just like look bad. And Raj guessed it might be a result of the budgeting. But I think that something that sets LA Story apart from UHF is the production value of the gags, right? So in LA Story, the production value was like too good and the humor was too cynical. In UHF, Weird Al, like I said, they only had $5 million to work with, but that's this guy's comfort zone. Like, this is what he wants. So when you see like somebody get their arm, whipped off by Indiana Jones, and the green screen backgrounds, the cheap explosions, the cheesy set designs, they're perfect for the carefree mood of this comedy. Like, it's not cynical. It's having fun. It's not serious. It's very self-aware. He's not shitting on Indiana Jones. Like, he's not saying it's a stupid movie. He's saying, I observed while watching Indiana Jones that this part and this part seemed kind of goofy to me and wasn't that fun to watch. So you see that with his Indiana Jones, his Conan. He's celebrating how ridiculous these things are.
In addition, I kind of have to wonder about how much he's laughing at himself. In the scene where he's in the burger joint and he's complaining, they don't appreciate my drive and my imagination or my creativity. And then he lifts up the fry king and he's just destroyed the entire batch of fries and he's just completely indifferent. I had to laugh because, lately I've really been considering the priority of labor in our society and classist issues. I think about it a lot, and I think about like fast food workers, how they're the most underappreciated and undervalued segment of our population. They feed us on a regular basis more than they should, but they do. And I think, God, they never pay these guys enough. And then I run through a drive-thru and I watch how badly they fuck up an order or throw together a sandwich. And I think, God, like, I really want to be on their side, but fuck if they don't, like, make it real hard. I have to imagine that inside each one of these restaurants, there's a guy thinking about how he is underappreciated, undervalued, and this job isn't worth his time, but the guy cannot make a fucking sandwich to save his life.
I mean, the guy who's behind the counter who asks if you want to hear his freestyle. That's happened to me like 4 or 5 times in my life where I'm just like, dude, I just want a taco, man. No, man, listen to this. Listen, hear me spit.
So you remember I have a sandwich shop idea. You buy your sandwich, there's the meal deal, but for an extra $1, we'll actually make it right. And for an extra $3, you come behind the counter and make it yourself. What if that was the new deal? Hey, we'll make your food well. You've just got to listen to us for 5 minutes. Would you do it?
No, I would not. I'm like the guy who goes to like Korean barbecue and I don't want to cook it myself. I'm like, look, I'm here. I'm paying you. You can cook it because you're better at it than I am. You're a professional. I don't know.
Well, in theory they are, but then look at what shows up.
So speaking of the burger joint, one of the things I really loved is this 80s aesthetic of this movie. And I was like, why do I love this so much? This is the sweet spot for me as far as nostalgia goes. Like late 80s was my favorite America style-wise. Yeah, you had your gender inequality, your racism, your drug war, your anti-gay views, the AIDS epidemic, obsession with saxophones. But from a sheer style perspective, I loved America at this time. And you can still find it sometimes like in cozy Midwest dive bars, I think in like Wisconsin, Michigan. And I was recently in Louisville, and this is still very much alive. Or when you go to like older people's homes and they still have that sign up that like Mom's Cafe. You know, I love that shit. And you see that here in UHF. You got hats with slogans, unironic mustaches, wood paneling on everything. Or one of my favorite things, which is in vogue now, but it wasn't trying to be cool then, was like when you had t-shirts with like mom and pop business logos on them, you know, just that butcher shop down the street or that cafe that you go to. And then you add in the TV commercials that they had in this, like Crazy Eddie, you know, used to have that in the 80s. A guy would be trying to sell carpet or cars and, you know, I'm going to club this baby seal. I'll do it too. Like, you know, that's absolutely reminds me of my childhood growing up in Arizona with Tex Earnhardt on TV, who this guy like would have car washes at his dealership as kind of a way to get people in the door. And he'd have his shirt off. He's there in like his cowboy boots and jeans. And you can see all of his scars from getting gored by bulls and shit. It was amazing.
He rode on a giant bull and he'd go, "We give you the best price on your vehicle. And that ain't no bull." He had a big sign in his yard that said, "You better be able to cross this field in 9 seconds. The bull can do it in 10. The guy was amazing. I recently learned he's still around. He's not shooting commercials anymore, but he's still on this earth.
He's going to outlive both of us. When I was a kid, I used to imagine, because, you know, I grew up in a single parent household. My dad passed away before I was born. Thanks for bringing it up, Raj. And I would imagine that this was going to be my dad, that my mom would go to the Earnhardt dealership one day and Tex would be my dad and I'd be a real Arizonan.
No, you're making that shit up.
No, I'm dead serious. I didn't have like a father figure. I didn't know what, like, I was like, he seems manly.
Listen, when I was a kid, I lived in a real rural area and we took a rural school bus and it brought us by Tex's place. And I'm not shitting you, like 9 or 10 Hispanic kids lived in a house right next door to Tex Earnhardt's great big ranch.
Suspect.
And they all like, they all had nice clothes and they all like rode, like, that was their bus stop. But like, there wasn't a bunch of dads around. So, I mean, there was the popular theory that, you know, his house cleaners and whatever that he employed, just, these were the illegitimate children of a great Arizonan and a wonderful human being and a fantastic entrepreneur. Ladies and gentlemen, Tex Earnhardt. Let's hear it for Tex.
Yeah, he was cooking up a little Tex-Mex. Gross.
So, you know, when we were kids, the two big channels we watched, Channel 15 and Channel 45, those were our UHF stations. These were your go-to stations for the best in TV. This is where Married with Children came from. This was where you had Liquid Television and Herman's Head. Remember Herman's Head? Like, these were all these really cheaply made, weird, like lowbrow, kind of high concept, subversive TV shows. This is where you went to watch the cool stuff. That's also where all your old great monster movies, like, or monster TV shows, Tales from the Crypt played there, Monsters played there, Tales from the Dark Side. All the stuff that's going to come by and later inspire Stranger Things. Like, That's where all the weird shit on TV came from. It was cheap entertainment. There was a ton of it. You had to stay up late to catch a lot of it. This movie really captures that in its vibe and its feel because it is just so like local looking. Like it's definitely a local TV station.
Yeah, I remember Channel 45 as a kid. That was just my jam. I had my TV that I had to kind of hand tune, you know, and you had to do the tinfoil thing, and I would watch all the shows that you mentioned. Plus, like back in the day in Phoenix, we only had the Suns. That was like our only sports team, and you could watch basically every Suns game on Channel 45, and that was just like a normal thing. Now there's like, you know, you have to have cable and certain packages and crap like that, but they were just like, no, just free on the airwaves, and I would, you know, my mom would come home with a Little Caesars pizza that blew our minds that we had enough money for a pizza. We'd do that and watch the Suns play, and I got to say that was the happiest I've ever been in my life.
I changed the channel with a pair of vice grips.
I did that too. No, I didn't have vice grips. They were just, it was locking pliers, but close enough. Well, George introduces himself to R.J. Fletcher, the CEO of the primary competitor in the city, VHF station and network affiliate Channel 8. It's never clear exactly which network it was on. Fletcher suspects George is trying to spy on him and has his henchmen throw George out. Outside, George runs into Stanley, a janitor just unfairly fired by RJ over some misplaced files, and offers him a job at Channel 62.
You couldn't ask for a more squared off intro to a plot than what they bring you here. RJ Fletcher, what a great villain. You know, way back when we reviewed Blues Brothers, I think I mentioned Hollywood faces of the 70s and 80s and this weird sort of homogenization of entertainment faces that you get now. Nobody looks now like they did back then. He had this big square jaw and these ceramic looking teeth. Almost looks not human. But there were a ton of these guys out there that had really great long Hollywood careers. This guy is your stereotypical old white guy business villain. He's just, it's in his face. And it pulled this guy a career that spans almost 100 movies over 70 years. He's been around forever, and when you see his face, you instantly know who he is and what he's going to be in this movie.
Yeah, watching this movie as a kid, I remember that my friends and I, Alan, Ryan, and I, we'd be watching this movie, and when RJ would go into one of his tirades, we would all quote along with him. We were just excited about RJ as we were any of our heroes. And when he says, "Oh, UHF station," you love it. And all of these henchmen and bad guys were just so gripping.
I think you had to be born with 8 extra teeth in your mouth to effectively do an impression of him.
Well, along with Kevin McCarthy as RJ Reynolds, who I agree is arguably the greatest 80s comedy villain. You got David Proval as the head henchman. And if you're wondering who he is, he's like that Italian-American tough guy that's in like every Scorsese movie. He was in 4 Rooms and also really knows how to mouth a toothpick. But that guy he's fantastic as kind of a foil to Stanley Spadowski. He's not like particularly sadistic. He's a very professional kind of henchman, but he's got this cool to him where, again, every single guy who's a bad guy in this movie, you also are kind of secretly rooting for. In addition to him, you have RJ's son, RJ Jr., who's played by John Paragon, and he's kind of a counter to the head henchman, where he's like he wants to suck up to his dad. He's kind of the whimpery one. He's a little bit of a goof. And I was like, man, his face looks so familiar. So what I want you to do is, when you're watching this movie, look at John Paragon, then imagine him in Blueface, and you realize this was John B. from Pee-wee's Playhouse, who also actually helped co-write the show. But of course, the greatest young actor in this movie, kind of an unknown at the time, but just blows the doors off this film, is Michael Richards. So most people know Michael Richards as Kramer, and they think that Seinfeld is the pinnacle of his comedic achievement. I'm inclined to agree with Erika that Stanley Spadowski is the funniest Richards has ever been. He has this electric energy, and as I'm watching this movie, I never realized as a kid, he might be a bit of a stand-in for people with developmental disabilities. He's a little bit disadvantaged cognitively. He doesn't really quite fit in socially. And I think this was like a really beautiful theme among 80s movies, like characters like Sloth, or characters like Stanley Spadowski, where you had these characters that had like sort of societal handicaps or just little things that set them apart from everyone else that caused them to have lower stations in life, whether it was like being locked in a basement or serving as a janitor, but they were proud of what they were. And as the movie goes on, they're presented as the most charismatic heroes of the movie. Like the UHF station Channel 62 is fucked without Stanley.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about this time period. It reminds me when I was watching it. I mean, he's so proud of being a janitor. I recalled the luggage salesman from Joe versus the Volcano, who is the most solemn and like sincere and like capable individual you see in the whole movie. He devotes his entire life to the sale of luggage. It's his primary concern. How did Michael Richards not get called upon to do this character in every fucking cartoon or any other TV show that he shows up in after this? Because infinitely more charismatic and interesting than Kramer. Kramer's great, but I mean, this is on a whole nother level. And they bring it up for this movie, and then nothing ever comes of it again.
Well, and Kramer is, he's like more polished. He's a little more sophisticated. And I guess it's that, that Seinfeld vibe, that New York vibe. But here you have him, and again, he's in his youth. Just through the limited presentation of Stanley Spadowski, you can make up his whole backstory. All you know about the guy is he's a janitor. He got his mop from his dad when he was 8. That's it. But you kind of know, like you can imagine his home life. You can imagine how he'd react to every situation. And he's one of those gags in a movie that thankfully you can't get enough of. Well, George and Bob attempt to create new programs for Channel 62, but the new shows barely alter viewership. Bob warns George that there are days from becoming insolvent, and depressed, George goes on Uncle Nutsy's Clubhouse and laments about his life, finally letting Stanley take over the show as he leaves for the bar. By the time George and Bob arrive at the bar, they find its patronage are eagerly watching Channel 62 and the humorous slapstick antics of Stanley Spadowski. George and Bob race back to Channel 62, finding there's a renewed interest in the station. Inspired by Stanley, George comes up with a whole range of wacky shows to fill Channel 62's schedule, all headlined by the newly retitled Stanley Spadowski's Clubhouse. So, yeah, before we get Stanley Spadowski's Funhouse, Weird Al takes his hand at it as George, and he tries to have Uncle Nutsy's Clubhouse. And it doesn't go so well. The kids are just not engaged. And he's doing his best, even, feeding Bobo the Clown dog biscuits, which, by the way, Bobo the Clown, the second horn blast that he does, it's that sad, that alone is worth about 5 minutes of laughs from me. But there's this great scene where I'd never noticed it as a kid, again, because I guess kids don't notice this sort of shit. But as an adult, Uncle Nutsy leans forward and he's talking to this kid. He says, "What's your name?" And the kid's name is Billy. And the kid just spits directly in his face. And you can watch on the kid's face as he's trying to cover his mouth. He's dying trying to hold in that laugh.
Listen, I have spit in an enemy's face before, and I never spit that well as a full-grown man. I mean, it's got force, direction, and substance, and the hanger. How many times did they have to shoot that before they got it right? And can you imagine just being like, "All right, kid, I just need you to just spit in that man's face." Like, it's shocking to this day, even though knowing it's coming, I see that and I just go, "Holy shit." Yeah,
Billy looks embarrassed about it like 5 minutes later as they're shooting that same scene. He's like trying to cover his face. He knows what he did.
Yeah, that's some real shit. But beyond that, what should have been shocking but really wasn't, I think, is this really where this movie, I think, dances on a real fine line. And I'm talking about Cooney and Ramon, the karate guy, and Ramon from Ramon's Wild Kingdom. I got to ask you, do you think that these roles could be written and take place today? I've never been a fan of funny voice comedy, which is, I think, the realm in which these things fall. But when you listen to two of these guys talk with their energy and their delivery, you can't help but smile. But in today's light, you're kind of laughing for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I mean, most movies today are not going to take a stab at this. If they do, they're like already dumb movies. So like if you're doing like one of like the Medea movies or something like that, but that's usually like it's self-contained where it's a race making fun of itself, and then you kind of get away with it. But I think the last time I've seen anything close to this was like The Hangover, where you're like, oh, okay, like funny Asian guy.
Right.
But I suspect that longtime Shat listeners would be surprised in my defense of these characters. Like they're like, hey, Gene, when are you going to talk about the racist portrayal of Cooney? by Gary Watanabe, who was born in Ogden, Utah, and does not speak any Japanese, but every role he does seems to be a character with a heavy Asian accent, most notably when he did Long Duck Dong in 16 Candles. And yeah, this deserves to be discussed. So I'm glad you brought it up, King B. And this is going to sound like a UHF apologist because I love the movie so much, and maybe it is, but I don't see Cooney as a character written out of racism. Like, is it a racial stereotype? Yeah, absolutely. He's a Japanese guy with a heavy accent who does karate. Like, I get it.
Wears a gi.
Is obsessed with fish. But going back to that idea of being a big celebration, like a big party, I think UHF makes Cooney a hero, like, throughout the movie. He's dissing on white people during Wheel of Fish, calling people, stupid. He's kicking ass in the Stanley rescue raid. He's got his own business. He's a great friend to Weird Al's character, George. And if anybody has their shit together in this movie, it's Cooney. I think UHF's ultimate message is like, whatever sets you apart from the successful mainstream, we love you and we're going to win this together. And it's that populist inclusion that just happens to use a racial stereotype to depict diversity. So Ramon, with his weird assness and Cooney with his weird assness, they're not just weird because of their race. They're just fucking weird guys, but they're part of what makes this UHF station special.
So now I'm going to challenge you on this. If that is the case, does Apu from The Simpsons get a pass? He's a completely fleshed out character. He's a business owner. He's a good family man. There's no malicious bone in his body, but socially, he's been really shit on in the last couple of years, a little late to the game. I mean, at this point, are we really going to complain about that? But how does that compare?
Let's contrast, Apu with other characters, or contrast, say, Cooney with Long Duck Dong, where in one case you've got a guy who's like, he's an exchange student, and isn't that funny that he's so different and doesn't understand how life goes, right? Doesn't understand the world. He's handicapped by his Asianness. And I think in the case of like Apu, he's usually looking down on the white characters as like less evolved or less sophisticated or less intelligent than he is.
They're inconveniencing him.
Yeah, they're inconveniencing him, exactly. So I don't really see a problem with him.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to pick at.
And focusing back on Ramon, if you talk to anybody about UHF, I'd say that there's a 50-50 chance that the quote that's going to come out of their mouth is something from Ramon, whether it's the turtles sticking to the ceiling or poodles flying. This guy is fantastic, and sadly did die, just after principal filming was finished. So the film is kind of in a way dedicated to him.
Yeah, Ramon's Wild Kingdom is my absolute favorite. The failed flying poodle thing is, I think, that perfect level of like kind of dark and unpleasant, but still just ridiculous and lighthearted. The turtle being nature's suction cup. I would watch full seasons of this show, kind of like I'd watch Brian Fellow from SNL. So I got to ask, that being said, what's your favorite gag in this whole movie?
I think my favorite one was one of the first ones that they did, which is the scene where Emo Philips makes a cameo, and he's doing kind of like, he's like the shop guy with the table saw. The faces that he makes, the way he carries his body. If you haven't seen the movie recently, or you don't know who I'm referencing, he's the guy that like used the table saw and cuts off his own finger, and then there's just like fake blood spraying all over the place. And that visual part is funny, but the best part for me is there's this triangle of interaction between three great comedic actors. So you've got Emo Philips, and he's doing these paraprosdokians, which is when the way he talks, he'll say a couple things and then there's an awkward pause, and then he'll drop the end of the sentence, and that's what makes his entire stand-up act funny.
There's a word for that.
Yeah, paraprosdokians.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I didn't know that prior to looking it up. Okay. I literally looked up. I was like, what makes Emo Philips funny? Paraprosdokians. So he's doing that. Meanwhile, Weird Al has this amazingly deadpan way of coping with the strange. He flips the switch between being like overly exuberant and wild, and then when something weird happens, he just kind of shuts off for a second and becomes very sobered. So you have that happening, but my favorite part is Lou B. Washington. He's the huge black guy that's behind the camera, possibly the only black guy in the movie, King B pointed out. He's just holding that sandwich. There's this weird paradox between his ability to react to these oddities occurring around him with like the wide eyes and just kind of the mouth agape, but then he's also like still holding on to his sandwich, like he's very anchored in the world. And he does it again when he gets his own practical joke show, and his practical joke is just tripping people and then
whose
shrugging.
arms are full.
Yeah.
Does he have any lines in this movie?
I don't think he says a single word in the movie.
So we've got a movie about the inclusion of outsiders, and it's got one black guy. He never gets one speaking part.
He does get to play the drums for a second too, though, which is great. He does everything. He's running everything behind the scenes. It's him and Philo.
He's a triple threat.
Well, soon Channel 62's ratings rival that of Channel 8's, infuriating RJ. RJ investigates and discovers that Harvey owns the station and, having just lost a wager on a horse race, owes his mysterious bookie Big Louie $75,000 by the end of the week. RJ offers to pay off Harvey's debt in exchange for the deed to Channel 62, which he plans to shut down afterward. Once Esther learns of this, she coerces Harvey into giving George the opportunity to make a counteroffer. George, after moping outside over the situation and wondering what to do, comes up with the idea of a telethon to sell stocks in the station, which would not only save it from RJ, it would make it publicly owned if they succeed.
This plot is so perfectly corny. I mean, it was truly written by people who just have cartoons on the brain. There's real balls here. I mean, of course, it's kiddish satire, but I also feel like it's daring in the sense that there's no rock bottom. It's lighthearted, but it's still lowest common denominator, like schlock. It's occasionally gross, but it's never malicious. I mean, it's obvious that a generation raised on cartoons is really shining through, and this is their big movie moment.
So as I was watching the movie for this commission podcast, I had read Erika's letter, and I was like, shit, she is absolutely right. Like, Weird Al likes to focus on violence and anguish to express himself. He's always like screaming words out. He talks about, bashing his brains, even asks Bob to bash his brains with a crowbar, but then he'll suddenly switch the switch back to comedy. Thanks, Erika, for giving me a perspective I can never unsee. But King B, I kind of agree with you, because if you look at it from that perspective, you could say, well, yeah, the Roadrunner and the Coyote is simultaneously sadistic and masochistic. Tom and Jerry, same thing. If you look at it as a cartoon, it makes perfect sense.
There were plenty of times where Bugs Bunny just wailed and screamed in agony, whacked himself in the head with a hammer, things like that. I mean, there's a almost horror aspect to the violence of it, but at the same time, it's just so unreal, it's not threatening.
Now, if you'll pardon me, listeners, I'm going to get a little heavy here. And it has to do with the possibility that Channel 62 might be the perfect TV station. So throughout this movie, we're watching it, and it's supposed to be like, oh, Channel 62, they don't have their shit together. Channel 8's the professional station, and it's, doing real TV. It's got real news, not just, Fran Drescher with a little person, cameraman Noodles, played by Billy Barty. In this case, I want to make the argument for why this UHF station might actually be exactly what it needs to be. So I recently read a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by the author Neil Postman. And in it, Postman argues that every art form has a unique message it can communicate. So, for example, the written word, like sentences, it's naturally declarative. It is impossible to write anything without expressing something. You could write any one word, and it's already expressing an idea, that thing, right? So you can write car, and that means car. Like, it has meaning to it that you can solidly identify.
Farts.
Likewise, it's very hard to write a painting. So if I try to write you a painting and you said you can have unlimited words, you can write as long as you want, write that painting, it's still not going to be the painting, because visual art works differently than written art. So Postman's idea is that extends to TV too. So when we make stuff that's too serious, like Watchmen or Westworld or The Wire, some of my favorite shows, we end up having to make sacrifices because it's still TV. TV isn't very good at expressing internal monologue like the way the written word can. You can write in a book, then he thought this, or memory, then he remembered that. But some of the most cringeworthy scenes we've seen in TV and movies is when somebody tries to depict somebody's memory of something. It almost never goes right. But we try anyway. So Postman argues that TV is best for silly things, right? Like stuff that you just see and you immediately have a reaction to. It makes you laugh, or it shocks you, or whatever. And that's exactly what we're seeing on UHF, whether it's, Conan the Librarian or Gandhi 2. It's just stuff that's just goofy and it's right there. And it doesn't really have a lot of meaning. It just exists. And so George has made this station that perfectly harnesses the absolute true power of television. And looking at it from that perspective, I was like, fuck, man, that's why this TV station works.
And years later, a young Seth MacFarlane would come out with a television show called The Family Guy.
Well, the telethon launches with great interest, fueled by Stanley's boundless energy. RJ sends his henchmen to kidnap Stanley, which stalls the telethon. Philo, the station's engineer who had previously bugged Channel 8, discovers the kidnapping and alerts George. George and several staff members mount a rescue mission to recover Stanley, bringing him back to the station with only hours left before Big Louie's deadline. RJ makes one last attempt to stall the telethon by issuing a live public statement, but Philo interrupts with previously taken footage of RJ derogatorily talking to Terry about the city's population. I love this movie. It would be a perfect movie to me, except for one slight gripe, and Erika, I think you might have seen this as well. Some of the fantasy vignettes, as we go through this movie, which is only 90 minutes long, they actually interrupt this plot. And the plot's a lot of fun. Like, what's happening in the real world, quote unquote, in this movie is the funniest part of the movie. The vignettes are okay, and I can forgive them, whether it's Spatula City or the Rambo scene. But in particular, I really disliked the Beverly Hillbillies music video. The song parody itself, I enjoyed on its own outside this movie. And when I saw this video on Al TV, I thought it was pretty funny. But it just kind of interrupts the movie. It just seems kind of self-congratulatory. And yeah, it's a great Dire Straits joke, but I just don't know how it fits in, and it kind of just sucked up some time. So I was ready to write off that Rambo parody too. But thankfully, Weird Al's awareness of the camera and breaking the fourth wall actually saves the Rambo parody. So it starts off and we're just like, oh, great. It's going to be more Rambo. And again, kudos to Weird Al. He's not saying you're an idiot for liking Rambo. He's not shitting on Rambo as a movie. He's saying, like, here's all the tropes about Rambo, and let's dial it up to 11 and see how funny it is. And what really saves it is when he, again, keeps looking at the camera. He's doing the Sylvester Stallone snarl thing, and then just blowing up like every famous landmark while screaming. Aah! And then when you extend it back into the real world, and he throws open the double doors at Channel 8, and he's still doing it, it pays off with a big laugh.
It was real good. It was real good. And they just look at him. All right. Let me ask you this. Without guilt, can you laugh at the line, that little Clampett's got his own jet airplane? That little Clampett is a millionaire.
No, it's again, the song itself is great. It's just like, it just kind of interrupts the movie. And I'm like, what does any of this have to do? I mean, I know he's watching Beverly Hillbillies while he dozes off.
His attention to detail in recreating that music video was top notch.
And again, in that too, he's also aware of where the camera is. So every time it moves, he's like looking for it. And that, it gets some laughs from me. It just felt kind of out of place.
Speaking of out of place, but totally in place and making complete sense, how about our secondary villain, Big Louie, the bookie? You never see his face, just the back of his chair and his right arm. Possible cousin to Dr. Claw, the Inspector Gadget villain. For all you Shat listeners, I'm going to offer a $1 bounty for any and all identifications of single-arm bad guys in movie and TV.
Yeah, right into hosts at shatthemovies.com. Please let us know of every single-arm cited bad guy. Is it $1 per, or is it $1 to the person who spots the most?
It is $1 per villain identified, no duplicates. So the first person in with the most obviously gets the biggest payout.
Wow.
Obviously, Big Louie and Dr. Claw off the table. They have been identified. All future villains, which must be a single arm and nothing else. Maybe the back of a chair. Big Louie does show up in the car the second time, but it's got to be a single arm sighting, and that is all.
As Big Louie's deadline is looming and everybody's trying to get the money together, we get this telethon, and it is just an absolute parade of weird. And I've said this before when we did the Money Pit, that one of my favorite things about the 80s was like music videos didn't really make sense. Like Cyndi Lauper would just be like, hey, I got 8 freaks. We're going to go in a room with Captain Lou, and it's a video, right? Let's talk about some of the things we see during this telethon. We got the two guys. I don't know what the fuck they're supposed to be. They got like the elongated faces and the sledgehammers, and they just go, and I thought it was going to go somewhere, and it's just like, nope, that's what they do. You got Uncle Sam on the stilts, and then there's like headless dancers with like painted bellies. I don't know what's going on there. And one of the great scenes is actually also in the background, too. I think he shows up several times during the movie, in particular in Stanley Spadowski's clubhouse, is Dr. Demento. He's in the audience, and he actually gets fed whipped cream, like directly into his mouth. So great little cameo there. Kids are just fucking losing their minds. And again, it's that 80s, like, if this seems inauthentic to you when you weren't around during the 80s, this is how crowds acted in the 80s. They were just fucking, people would lose their goddamn minds over the smallest thing. It was so much fun, and it really reminded me of that part of my childhood. And it's all happening so fast that each time I rewatch this movie, I see something else happening in the audience. It's just like, oh, fuck, look at that.
They were getting a hit, just a portion of what the modern media landscape looks like. Yeah, 80s audiences used to go batshit fucking crazy. You heard there was a Trails commercial being filmed and you lost your mind. You couldn't wait to see it. And then iPhones and internet came and made us numb to it all. What are you going to do? How long and how much of this channel could you realistically watch? I've already stated I could watch Ramon's Wild Kingdom ad nauseum. I wouldn't watch The Wheel of Fish if Cooney had a Karate Corner combat competition show. I could be in for that, but I couldn't hang around for the weirdos with the sledgehammers or the Uncle Sam on stilts.
Yeah, looking at the broader scheduling that Weird Al is showing for Channel 62, I'm like, I don't know if I'd watch all this. I hate to say this, like, this is me getting old, this is me getting cold inside, where I'm just like, I don't watch TV except for the shit that I already just railed against, which is like, is it super fucking heavy? Then yeah, I'll watch it. If a show cannot tell me a gorgeous narrative arc over the course of a season, I'm disinterested. If there's anything that defies belief or doesn't pass the sniff test, I'm disinterested. There's not a lot of TV that I like, I'll be honest. I really hate doing that too, because when listeners to our sister podcast, Shat on TV, write in, they're like, hey, you should cover this show. And I feel really bad. It's not that I'm judging you. It's not that the show's not entertaining. It might be. It's just that it takes a lot of lift for a movie or a TV show to catch my attention. But when I'm in, I am all in.
We're real specific about our highs.
Well, RJ arrives at the station just as the telethon ends, still $2,000 short of its goal. Big Louie's limousine arrives, and Harvey anxiously concedes victory to RJ, who decides to celebrate his triumph with a speech to the crowd about what will become of the station. Meanwhile, George is approached by a hobo whom he had helped earlier. The man wants to buy the rest of the stock with money he got from selling a rare 1955 double die cent that RJ had given him as a pittance, unaware of its true value. George hands over the money to Big Louie while RJ is still boasting to the crowd. Before RJ can do anything, Harvey signs the ownership transfer and the station officially becomes publicly owned. I want to take just a second to talk about the hobo, the bum that you see in this movie. Now, King B and I are watching this movie, and we're like, there is no way that guy is not an actual bum. There's no way that guy hasn't spent the last 10 years of his life on the street in the California sun, getting sunburnt, boozing himself to death, getting those bleary red eyes, and that slurred speech. He's got to be an actual homeless person. Wrong. The bum was played by an actor named Vance DeBar Colvig Jr., who was born in 1918 and sadly died in 1991. This was actually his final role. So Colvig, along with Trinidad Silva, this movie apparently killed them. He has a long Hollywood history. He was the first person to portray Bozo the Clown on a Harmon licensed TV program, and he lent his voice to the Chopper Bulldog character on the Yogi Bear show. So kudos to him. He's one of those characters that you cannot believe was anything other than the thing he was playing.
He was also the voice of Goofy.
Huh.
What do you think of that? Just to bring up the inclusion thing again, this closing sequence, that biker that jumps on screen to announce, they're back. Everyone runs outside to this parade of off-road vehicles that just come out of nowhere. There's the karate crew, George and Stanley. They're standing up in the back of the Jeep, and everyone's just so happy. And like, they really are this giant community, this family. I feel like in the world of UHF, anyone could just start a parade and anyone would join. It's weird to feel such a strong sense of community from like such a janky film.
I was watching this on a flight back from Louisville with a stop in Tampa. I was actually in Florida at the same time as Raj. And
you were still able to make it to record?
It's amazing. I know.
Whoa.
Crazy.
Dedication.
Yeah, I just get all the breaks in life.
Commitment.
But as I'm watching this final scene, I'm like pumping my fist on the flight, like, yeah, they did it. As that number drops to 75,000, and one of Cooney's guys jumps out from behind the giant board, and fireworks are going off, and everybody's cheering, and it was so fucking satisfying, man. Like, this is the reaction I think Star Wars wanted out of me when everyone gets their medals, but here. It did take a village, King B, and I was just so happy for it, and so happy for everybody who struggled so hard. Stanley Spadowski, Cooney, George, Bobo the Clown, Uncle Harvey. Just fucking kudos to all you guys.
I guess it really does take some sociopathic violence and misogyny to really bring us all together as a people.
Yeah, you want to talk about just a real creep vibe. I forgot to mention that when George finally comes into some money and he decides that he wants to kind of express his love for Terry, his girlfriend, played by Victoria Jackson, that room is like, I would have run. That is a murder room. The flowers and I can't live without you and the giant digital sign. Get out of there now.
Incidentally, the woman who stole my keys also told me she loved me.
Do you want to tell them that story?
I went on a date with a woman. I'm pretty sure she stole my keys on the first date. When I showed up for the third date, I think she was secretly getting progressively drunk in the other room. It's gotten weird, guys. It's gotten real weird.
Ladies, by the way, if you invite us over to your place and you want us to come in, answer the door when we come over. Don't say I was showering or whatever and I just hoped you would walk in. No man worth your time is going to walk into your home without your express permission being at the door when he does so. We also don't want to get shot.
Yeah, no man who has a survival instinct is just going to open a woman's door that he's only hung out with twice. Ugh, I forgot about that part.
Now it's that time in the podcast where we score this movie, UHF. Again, the Shat meter runs in reverse order from 5 wipes to 0, and it's how many wipes it would take to get this movie off your bum. A Shat score of 5 is Stanley Spadowski's mop, or maybe even something that's too tough to mop, something you got to get on the floor on your knees and get and scrub it with your toothbrush just to get it off. And you say, this floor is dirty and I'm not going to take it anymore. And 0 Wipes is an absolutely perfect, sparkling gem of a movie. This is R.J. Reynolds' dazzling porcelain teeth as he flashes a multi-million-dollar smile right in your face and turns your TV station into a parking lot. King B, what is your Shat score for UHF?
I feel a little bit guilty for being overly critical, but I'm going to give it 1 wipe. This really is a movie without conceit. No one is overly attractive, intelligent, or skilled. It's a world where everyone's just showing up, getting by, and trying to do their best. Gosh bless them. Nobody really learns a lesson, and a hobo saves the day.
I'm almost right there with you, King B. This is the little movie that could. It only had a budget of $5 million. It only made $6 million in the box office. It wasn't even deemed worthy of a DVD release until 2002, as Erika pointed out, a full 13 years after its theatrical release. Weird Al just gathered a bunch of young, funny actors, paired them up with some brilliant veterans, and then mixed it with wacky ideas and a freak show, and came out with this cinematic gem. I see so much of this film in more modern comedies, like the entire string of Adam Sandler movies that he did, the SNL releases, a lot of those movies. I'd almost say it was ahead of its time, but as I think about it, I don't think time had anything to do with it, because right now, this movie probably still would not resonate with people. It's for a very specific audience who absolutely adores it, and that's the best kind of film. It's a film that's made for you and not those other guys, and that's okay. So it's a half a wipe for me. Combining our Shat scores of 1 and 0.5, it comes out to 1.5, and divided by 2, that's 3/4 of a wipe for UHF. Now, that is a preliminary score. We got to weigh it in with Big D and Roger Roper to see if they propose any amendments to it. But as of right now, UHF, 0.75 wipes.
Is that what we do now? We average everyone gets a score on it?
We don't, but I think that the other two guys are going to shit a brick when they find out what we gave it. Tough. Show up.
How does it fit in the pantheon currently?
Well, King B, with 3/4 of a wipe, UHF is tied in the number 19 slot with Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It is better than Beetlejuice and worse than Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
I don't hate that call.
Yeah, I think it's right on the money. And if anybody's going to call foul and say I'm biased, yeah, I am. But if I was truly biased, I'd give it 0 wipes. I recognize this is not a perfect movie. It's perfect for what it's trying to be. And the real question is, does it stand the test of time? I laughed just as much as I did as a kid, and that's a rare thing.
Well, there you go.
Well, thanks, Erika, so much for commissioning this pod, and thanks, King B, for joining me on it. If you're looking forward to next week's movie, I will give you the description, but I will not tell you what it is. After getting a green card in exchange for assassinating a Cuban government official, Tony Montana stakes a claim on the drug trade in Miami. Viciously murdering anyone who stands in his way, Tony eventually becomes the biggest drug lord in the state, controlling nearly all the cocaine that comes through Miami. But increased pressure from the police, wars with Colombian drug cartels, and his own drug-fueled paranoia served to fuel the flames of his eventual downfall. It was commissioned by Dale Anderson and released in 1983, directed by Brian De Palma and written by Oliver Stone. So stick around after the end credits to hear the trailer for the movie we're doing next. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. On Facebook, just search for Shat the Movies. Our website is shatthemovies.com. If you'd like to email us, go to host@shatthemovies.com. Give us your reactions to the movies that we're doing. Give us suggestions for movies you'd like to see. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can just go to shatthemovies.com/support and find out ways you can help through PayPal, Venmo, Amazon, or even by taking a survey to help us get sponsors. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and True Detective. And currently, the King B, Raj, and I are doing Watchmen. You can still get caught up and listen along with us. We're just past halfway through the season right now. You can find all that information on our website, shatontv.com. On behalf of my co-hosts, the King B, Roger Roper, and Dick Ebert, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for the following movie.
Okay, so what do you call yourself? Huh? ¿Cómo se llama?
Antonio Montana. And you? What you call yourself?
Where'd you learn to speak the English, Tony?
In a school. And my father, he was from the United States. Yeah, just like you know. He was a Yankee. He used to take me a lot to the movies, you know. I learned. I watched the guys like Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney. They teach me to talk. I like those guys. I always know one day I'm coming here, United States.
1980, Miami. They called it Little Havana, where the American dream had a price tag, and only one man in a million was hungry enough to pay.
This country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman.
Scarface. For one brief moment, the world was his.
Chick he's with. She like me.
You must be kidding.
What you talking about? That's a Cadillac.
How do you know?
The eyes, Chico. They never lie.
Man, that's the boss's lady, okay?
I am the boss. That guy's soft.
I like you, Tony. There is no lying in you.
Here's to the land of opportunity.
We do business together a long time.
I know the street. And I'm making all the right connections.
Remember I told you when you started, the guys who last in this business, the guys who fly straight.
With the right woman, there's no stopping me. I could go right to the top.
The word on the street, Tony, is you're not a small-time punk anymore. Supreme Court says that your privacy can be invaded.
You shoot the house this month?
You're spending a lot of money on this counter surveillance.
We're doing 10 million, 15 million a month. Come on. Now that's serious money, you know? Your bank boys gotta come down a bit.
Who else can you trust? That's why you pay us what you do. You trust us. You're in good hands with us.
Al Pacino is Scarface. He loved the American dream with a vengeance. Al Pacino, Scarface.